Appreciate that, Tim. And wow, I feel it's loud up here. Didn't realize that. Hey, thank you for having me today. Appreciate the experience of being in this conference so far. I don't know about you, but I've had a really amazing awakening of seeing what a conference can look like. And not that I'm dissing other conferences that I've been in, but seriously, wow. I am very impressed. The leadership here is second to none. And I've worked with a lot of conference leaders. And the pastors here, I don't want to just be brown-nosing you, but wow. I've been really amazed at the level of professionalism, the intelligence, the drive that you all have. And so I just want to say that it is an honor to be called part of the Potomac team. It truly is. And thank you so much for allowing me to be part of that. We're going to be talking about, what is your capacity to multiply? What are you called to do in God's work? And so I want to look kind of back in the Bible first at a calling, because I think we all have calling. Does anybody here have a calling? Yeah, we all have a calling, right? And I want to look back, though, at the calling that we see of God's chosen people. Now, I believe with all of my heart that God chose the Seventh-day Adventist Church for this time. How about you? And do you believe that God has something that He wants us to do at the end times? Yeah, God chooses groups throughout biblical history, right? And if you go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, you'll see that God chose two people to be the parents of all mankind, right? And He gave them a pathway to follow. And He said to them, I want you to be what? Fruitful and to have dominion over the... So He gave them a pathway, right? He showed them what He wanted them to do, but He said, one thing I don't want you to do is I don't want you to go eat of that tree over there. Don't touch that tree. What did they do? They went their own pathway, right? They didn't follow God's pathway. Satan said, you could be like gods yourself. And so they chose their own pathway instead. How did that work out for them? Was that a good deal? Not a good deal for them, not a good deal for us at all. In fact, it impacted them. They got chased out of Eden, right? It even impacted their kids, right? Because God said, listen, I'm going to get mankind back on the right path. So He showed them how to worship, how to do the sacrifices, and they have two sons. Now, what did Abel say? I'm going to take God's path, right? But how about Cain? He wanted to do things his own way. He wanted to go on his own path. He didn't want to follow God's directions. And so what we find in the Bible is God talking to him about this. And He says, the Lord looked with favor on who? Abel was following the path and his offering. But on Cain and his offering, He did not look with favor. So Cain was what? Very angry, and his face was downcast. I want to do things my way, God. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but what? You must rule over it. Did He rule over it? Hello, pastors? No. You guys must have ate way too much. No, He didn't rule over it. In fact, he gets so angry, he kills his brother, right? He wants to do things his way. He gets so mad he can't do things his way, he ends up killing his own brother. Now, God also didn't just choose family. He expanded His family. He chose a group of people to be His nation. They started out small. The children of Israel, right? But when they went to Egypt, they began to expand and grow. In fact, they got so big that they were thrown into slavery. God heard their cry. As they grew and grew into a mighty nation, God heard their cry, and he helped them to escape slavery. And he even said, I'm going to take you on another path. I'm going to give you a land flowing with milk and honey. So they go through the desert led by the pillar of fire, led by the pillar of the cloud, and they went through even an ocean. God led them all the way to the edge of this land. And then he said, go send some spies. Find out if what I was telling you is true. So the spies go in. Was God lying? Not at all. Not at all. God was telling the truth. In fact, you know the story. They had to carry, two guys carrying one bunch of grapes because they were so huge. And so then God's people immediately went right into that land, right? Is that what they did, my pastors? No. No, they didn't. Instead, 10 of them said, we can't follow God's path. It's too dangerous. If we go this direction, what's going to happen? These guys are going to squish us like bugs. They're giants. We can't do it. And so they decided to go against God's will. They said, we can't go that. How did that work out for them? Not very good, right? In fact, they had to wander in the desert for 40 years until that entire generation passed away. And then God finally led them back into that promised land. Now, how many battering rams did they use? How many catapults did they need to knock down those walls? None. Because God said, I will give you this land. If they had just followed his path the first time, he would have done the same thing. I really believe it. And so now you think they would have understood that God is a God who keeps his promises. He directs his people. They would have learned their lesson by now, right? Well, not necessarily. You see, they began to look around as their kingdom was growing, and they started seeing that every other nation around them looked different. They were a theocracy. God was their king. But that country over there, they had a human on a throne. And so did they. And so did they. And so did they. And so what did they start doing? They start complaining, God, we want a king too. Give us a king. And finally, God, not being one who forces himself upon people, allowed them to have a king. And how did that work out for them? Not very well. As you know, most of the kings led the people into idolatry far, far away from God. Now, all of this time, though, God was still with them. They were his people. Even they kept turning away. And they had this temple built for them. And they're worshiping Sabbath after Sabbath. And you don't have to, when you're with a group of pastors, you know this. Every single thing in that service pointed towards what? Jesus, the coming Messiah, right? Every single thing pointed towards Jesus. They were waiting for the promised one. That was the pathway that all of this service pointed towards. Now, did Jesus come? Man, come on, people, let's go. We got to wake up. I'll have you all stand up like I do. I don't know if you're like me, but man, after I eat, I'm like, ugh, ugh. So I stand up. If you have to stand up, go ahead and stand up. If I wasn't a pastor, I don't know how I'd be in church because I can't sit that long. It's hard for me. So I'm all right. If you need to stand up and pace around, I'm okay with that. But yeah, this is exactly what happened. Jesus came, and so all of God's people who had been pointed towards this pathway by the service every single Sabbath, doing the Year of Atonement, all these things, when Jesus came, they were all gathered around, excited that the king was born, right? No. That didn't happen at all, right? God showed them the pathway. But Magi from a foreign land, they'd been reading the scriptures. They saw the signs. They knew when to be there. They come and they say, where's the newborn king? And how do God's people react? They're shocked. They're shocked. They don't even recognize that the thing that they said they were following this whole time, it was right in front of them at that very moment. But Jesus did come, and he chose a new group, the disciples. He chose the disciples. He walked with the disciples. He showed them his healing powers, touching lepers, healing the blind, worried about widows, all of these things. He was a great servant leader. And his chosen disciples got to live with him. Can you imagine that? Got to live with God on earth. Watching all these things, listening to him preach and teach. And what do? They begin to fight against each other, right? Who's going to get to sit on the right hand, God? Who's going to get to sit on the left hand? Begin to argue who should be the greatest in the kingdom. They weren't looking to be servant leaders. They wanted power, prestige, position. This is what they felt their calling was. We put in our time. Now give us an earthly throne. They didn't recognize the pathway that Jesus was showing them. Clearly, he was creating a heavenly throne, not an earthly throne. Then if you read Matthew, you see that Jesus told them about another path. And he actually told them multiple times. He said, I am going to die. He said, I'm going to be raised again, right? He told them, foreshadowed the cross, told them what was going to happen. Now the night came. His disciples are with him. The soldiers come. Did his disciples say, yes, the time is here? No. They took off running, right? When Jesus was dragged through that crowd and put up on a cross, they were all bowed before that cross, right? Praying, thank you for what you're doing for us. No, they were all in hiding. They were all in hiding. And in fact, 3 days later, you know that they had to at least been all by the tomb, right? Jesus told them what was going to happen. They had to be waiting for that stone to be rolled away. But they weren't. God's chosen disciples were hiding in fear instead of waiting for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But praise God, Jesus was resurrected. Amen? Amen. And Jesus worked with his disciples, and he talked with the disciples, and he trained his disciples, and he said this before he ascended. He said, you're going to be my witnesses. The Holy Spirit is going to come down. I'm paraphrasing. The Holy Spirit's going to come down. And when it does, I want you to go spread the good news to where? Jerusalem? Samaria? I'm sorry? Judea? And where else? Ends of the earth. To spread this news. He had a plan. He had a pathway for his early church. Did the Holy Spirit come? Oh yeah, the Holy Spirit came. Thousands were baptized the first day. And thousands and thousands and thousands more were added. And so they rushed out and spread the good news, right? No. They stayed in Jerusalem. If you read through Acts, you can see that they were staying in Jerusalem. Now, I'm sure they had excuses to do their own thing instead of Jesus' path. You know, now we're mega church pastors, right? We got this huge congregation we got to deal with. How are we gonna go do this? You know, we've got so many responsibilities. There's so many new people here in Jerusalem. And so God actually had to bring a persecution upon his own early church just to get them spread out and back on his path. Now, my brothers and sisters, we look through the Old Testament at people who are chosen by God. We look through the New Testament at people who are chosen by God. And we see that time and time again, God gives a path, but human beings like to do their own thing, like to follow their own pathway instead. Now we come to the end time church. Another people chosen to do something special. Is it possible? Is it just possible we could be doing the same thing? Are we so arrogant to believe that we could not be taking our own path instead of following a path that God gave us? And if that happened, what would happen to the mission of our church? It would bind us up. It would keep us from doing the things that God called us to do. It makes a huge impact on God's mission when God's people don't follow it. Now, I want to read some stuff from you, or for you, from the history of our church. And you can make up your own mind. But I'll read from Ellen White what she says here. She says this. She says, upon all who believe, God has placed a burden of raising up churches. I'll give you a little hint. What does that mean? All are called to do what? What does raise up churches mean? It is church planting. I'll show you another quote in a second. But that was their word for church planting in their days. So God has said, or God through Ellen White has said that upon all who believe. Is there any believers in this house today? Yeah, are you some believers? There's believers in the back there too? Yeah, all believers are called to have this burden. In fact, God placed that burden upon us, that we're supposed to be raising up churches upon all. Now, some of you, most of you probably are ordained. Now, don't beat me up for saying this, okay? But a lot of us wouldn't be ordained in Ellen White's day, James White's day. In fact, this is what James White writes in 1862. In no way can a preacher so well prove himself as in entering what? So, entering new fields. If he be successful in, here's that phrase again, right? Raising up churches, their word for church planting. If he be successful in raising up churches and establishing them so that they bear good fruits, he gives to his brethren the best proofs that he is sent of the Lord. That's pretty specific, right? Watch this. If they cannot raise up churches, then certainly the cause of truth has what? No need of them. And they had the best reasons for concluding that they made a sad mistake when they thought that God called them to teach the third angel's message. Wow. Wow. Well, don't beat me up. I'm just the messenger. All right? The Adventist church, planters were pastors, pastors were planters. That was our calling. This is who we were supposed to be. We were all supposed to be church planters. But something started happening in the church. You see, our church, just like the children of Israel, began to look around. They began to look at all the other denominations. And they said, wait a minute. Those Methodists, they have a pastor hovering over them to take care of all of their needs. And wait a minute, over there, the Catholics, they get their priests. The Congregationalists, they have a pastor. They began to look, and we look different. We don't have pastors because no pastors were over churches. They were out planting churches. The plan was this. You would go into community, you would raise up a church, you would train the leaders, and you would leave and let the lay people run the church. You go to the next place, raise up a church, train the leaders to run the church, and you'd leave. And this happened over and over again. And the Adventist church grew exponentially fast, amazingly fast. In fact, other denominations write articles about the Seventh-day Adventist Church at this time. And why is it growing so fast? And they all come to the same conclusion. It's because the pastors are planters. The people run the church. The pastors are spreading out the good news everywhere, starting new congregations and new fields all over the place. But then the people, like I said, began to complain, looking at all these other denominations. And they started saying to the leaders, we want to be like them. Who's supposed to be the head of the church? Jesus Christ. He's the head. But they want to put a human on that throne in their churches. They want a pastor hovering over them. So this is what Ellen White says in response to that in 1902. She said, there should not be a call to have settled pastors over our churches. If that's not what's supposed to happen, what is? But let the life-giving power of the truth impress the individual members to act, leading them to labor interestedly and to carry on efficient missionary work in each locality. God has a plan for this church. He gave us a message, the three angels' message, but he also gave us a method of delivery. We love the message. We love the message. But we've forgotten all about his method. We decided to do things our own way. In fact, let me tell you the truth. It's not our way we're doing things. We decided to do things the Catholic Church way. We have the message of the three angels and the method of the beast. Is that too hard? She says there should not be a call to have settled pastors over our churches. This wasn't. Yeah. It's right there. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we have the message of the three angels and the method of the beast. What happened is Luther, the other churches, they adopted this method of doing church from the Catholics. Really, you could trace it all the way back to Constantine. And see how Constantine didn't just change the Sabbath. He changed almost everything about the church. It became, again, centered on a temple. Because that's really what the sun worshipers did. They had temple worship. So he brought it back into a building-centered movement. I tell my people in my church all the time, this isn't the church, you are the church. You don't go to church. Where you go, there is church. We are the church according to the Bible. And our call is to go out into the world like Jesus, who is our head. But the people began to complain. We want to be pastor dependent like everybody else. That's not the words they used. But that's the reality of what happened. Let me give you one more quote here. This is from A.G. Daniels, 1912. For when we cease our forward movement work and begin to settle over our churches, to stay by them and do their thinking and praying and their work that is to be done, then our churches will begin to weaken and lose their life and spirit and become paralyzed and fossilized, and our work will be open retreat. This was who we were. They all knew it at the beginning. So what happened? When did these things change? Well, church historians will tell you exactly when it happened. When Ellen White died. When Ellen White died is when everything began to change. She was no longer defending both the message and the method. And we began to see churches large churches getting these settled pastors who had to take care of these bigger churches. But then the medium churches said, wait a minute, that's not fair. We're a thriving church. Give us, okay, we'll help you out. And pretty soon everybody had settled pastors. And our growth went from this to this. Rapidly. It happened rapidly. We were warned and warned. Now, how many people in this room were alive in 1920? Yeah, none of us. This isn't our fault. There's nobody to blame. This isn't a pound you on the head because you're doing something wrong. Nobody here, your seminary professors, they weren't alive. Well, maybe not all of them. None of our leaders in our conference were alive. We weren't there when this shift began, so we adopted this culture as normal Adventism. We think this is normal. That I have 4 churches that I have to do all this work for and make sure to maintain them, even though Ephesians chapter 4 tells us clearly that's not your job. Your job is to equip the saints to do the work, right? And so what happens when we do this, when we adopt this new method, this Catholic or Baptist method or whatever you want to call it? It affects our entire mission. Because now basically pastors, and man, you're going to hate me by the time I'm done with this. But pastors are basically just paid elders today. We're doing the work that the elders should be doing. And I know a lot of you would admit this, but really we're just highly paid babysitters in many cases. Because the people don't want to do anything. They don't want to do anything. They rely so much on us to do the work that God has created for them to do. And when that happens, it affects the entire mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Because what you're supposed to do is be raising up these leaders. Elders are supposed to be moving this missionary spirit forward in that community. Pushing forward this. Creating disciples. Helping the churches to thrive in their community. Deacons, they're not supposed to be just checking on toilets. They're supposed to be the social change agents of that community, bringing social justice to everyone who lives around their churches. But now, the pastors do the job of the elder, and so the elder is relegated to a much, much lower position. They're never allowed to thrive and grow to the leadership role that they're called to be in. It affects everything we're doing. There is a method and a message, and they're both tied together. And we need to start thinking about getting back on track to where God is calling us to be. The Adventist Church is uniquely designed by God for organic multiplication. When we follow God's plan, we grow. We see it throughout the history of the Bible. When God's people got back on God's path, they thrived. But when they just continue to turn away from Him, then terrible things happen to the message, the method, the effectiveness. All of these things were impacted. Jesus says, "Go and make disciples of all nations." Even this is impacted when we don't follow God's path. This is our calling. We're supposed to go make disciples. But if we don't create new churches, think about this. What if everybody here, let's say your church has 10 decent leaders, and you make it your mission that those 10 will reproduce one more each. So the next year you're going to have how many leaders now? 20, right? You had 10, you added 10 more, there's 20. They do the same thing the next year. Now how many do you have? How about the next year? See the problem? Unless you're like Braun or somebody from a big church, where are you going to be putting 80, 160 leaders in your church as it keeps growing? Church plant actually pushes forward discipleship. The first church that I planted, there was a mother church. First time I'd ever done a mother church plant was my first church plant. They had 340 in attendance. It was a decent-sized church. I was an intern. My first week, I was assigned to go plant a church. That was my first assignment as a pastor. Didn't even know what that meant. And he said, take everybody you want. I was like, really? Yeah, take them all. Whoever wants to go plant a church, go. We gathered 90 people out of that church. Out of 340, 90 wanted to go. That's a huge percentage. Every single one of their children's ministry leaders went with me. I'm talking about teachers, Sabbath school directors of all levels. All of them went with me. And I said to the pastor, what are you doing? You can't let all these people go. And he said, no, take them all. Whoever wants to go, they can go. This was a very healthy, thriving church. And I said, all right, I don't know what you guys are going to do then. Within 6 months, that church grew. All those 90 people that we took, we were way over 100 by then, they'd all come back. New people came in and filled those seats. But what was even more exciting, of those 90 people, a lot of them had to get expanded roles, had to start doing new things, expand their leadership capacity. They started growing. They started inviting their neighbors to this service. Their discipleship capacity grew and grew. And then at the church, there were people who had just been sitting around doing minimal things or nothing. And now there's all these open positions. And they felt now a call to rise up and to take these roles. So they were growing as leaders. They were expanding as disciples. Within a year, that church was at 390. They went from 340, we took 90. Within a year, they were at 390. They had grown, and their tithe was right back to where it was when we left. And now you have a thriving church on the other side of town and an even healthier church on this side of town. When we plant, we actually grow because we're back on God's path, and He blesses in ways we can't even imagine. People come out of the woodworks when you start planting churches. I planted a church in Seattle. I took 29 young adults out of one church. That church was not happy. He was fuming. He came and said, I just transferred, you didn't warn me, I just transferred 29 young adults out of my church today into your church because we had just become a company. And I said, oh, really? And I grabbed the list of everybody who came in that day. I put it before him and I said, pick your 29. Who are they? He only knew 2 of them. The rest were formers, non-attending Adventists. They were on the books, but they weren't in the seats. And he woke up, and so we helped them, and they became a thriving young adult center as well. Church planting helps everyone. I've never planted a church where the other churches around us didn't grow the same time we grew. It happens because this is God's pathway, not our own pathway. Does that make sense? All right. So leaders, we're called to replace ourselves. That's what Jesus did, right? Who are we supposed to be like? We're supposed to be like Jesus. And so He invested in people and helped them grow. And so I thought, man, what if I tried something crazy like that? And so the first time I tried it, I picked 7 people and I said, for 2 years, if you're willing, you're just going to follow me around. I'm going to invest in you. These people, none of them ever wanted to be a pastor. It wasn't in their brains. But I just said, I want to do what Jesus did, but I'm not as good as Jesus. I can't handle 12. So another heavenly number is 7. Let me start with that one. Maybe I should have only done 3. I'm not that good. But we tried 7. After 2 years, 6 of them went on to become pastors. 2 of them were hired by a conference, and they never went to school at college a day in their lives. They were that effective. The conference said, we need you now. And they hired them on the spot. This is what happens when we start following God's plan to multiply. We see leaders growing. I really have a problem with the idea that disciples are just followers, because that's not what Jesus made. And of course, they followed him, but they were world changers. They were leaders. They impacted the culture. And that's what we're called to create when we make disciples. This is what I call multiplication capacity. In our churches, we should have members reach out and find new members. We talk about that a lot. Evangelism. I've heard some great stories from some of the pastors here that do this. Then members are discipled, and they lead the church, and they make new disciples and new leaders. And then churches send out leaders to plant new churches. This is God's plan for us. So I have a question for you today, my brothers and sisters. Are we going to go back to God's path? I mean, we have a choice. We can keep doing it this way. We can keep following this path. Or we can start investing in our people. Start helping them grow as leaders. Now, not every pastor, honestly, I'm not of the opinion that every single pastor in this room is going to plant a church. I know that that's not likely. But you can send people out who can plant. If you don't feel that is your capacity, then you can train others in your church and send them out and support them to plant. But we are called to reach this conference. We're called to do that. And we need over 311 more churches just to get one church for every 20,000 in the population. It's never going to happen if we keep doing things on this pathway. It's just never going to happen. Adding 3, 4, 5 a year is not enough. So I'm going to ask you to make a commitment, not to me, not to the conference, but to God. To say, I'm going to support church planting. Whatever that looks like, you're going to have to decide. I'm going to support this movement forward. I'm going to start training leaders. And either I'm going to go and just help establish a new church, not saying you can leave your churches without any representation, but I'm going to help them plant, or I'm going to send people to plant. But I'm going to help support church planting. Maybe a couple of you in an area will start planting a church together. I don't know. But we're called to do something big, huge. And it's not going to be easy. But with God leading us on the pathway He designed, you're going to see miracles you never anticipated. I guarantee you. I want to have a prayer right now that we just dedicate ourselves to this. Can we do that together? Would you stand with me right now? Gracious Lord, we know that we do not have all the answers. Sometimes we feel ill-equipped for the ministry you called us to. But Lord, I do believe you have a path for this church to follow. You have an amazing message, the three angels' message that you've given us, the truth that you revealed in your scriptures to us. It's so powerful, so beautiful, Lord. But you also gave us a pathway to follow. You called us, Lord, to go forward on this path as well. Lord, none of us here were around when the ship was turned, but we can help turn it back. So I ask you, Lord, help us to make a commitment right now. Make a commitment to follow your ways, to say yes to your path. Forgive us for ever going on our own. And I ask you, Lord, bless this conference. We want to see your kingdom glorified through the work that we do and our churches do. We want to see people saved for your kingdom. We want to see our neighbors love you, Jesus, like we love you. So help us, Lord. Guide us as the head of this church. We are so thrilled to be part of it. In your beautiful name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so take a how many minutes? 6-minute break, please. We're going to start in 6 minutes. Thank you so much. All right, all right. Thank you so much. I appreciate only 2 of you came up and hit me while I was up here. So I really appreciate that you didn't all gang tackle me at once. I'm sure that I'll be bloody and bruised later. All right, so we have, I'm gonna actually let you know, we're gonna do some questions at the end. So if you have questions as we're going through, write them down. I'd be love to chat with you. We're not gonna be able to get to every question, but we're gonna get to as many as we can by the end. And so hopefully I'll be able to cover those with you. I want to start out, you should have a bunch of handouts in front of you. You should have a handout that looks like this with Potomac Conference training opportunities. You should have another handout that looks like this for seeds. So my handout people, raise your hands if you don't have handouts. Okay, so this table, there's a couple over here, a couple over here. They tried to get you but on the break, but they didn't know where everybody was going to be at, okay? So here's these, yeah, thanks. You should have one that says 10 steps to launching a healthy new church. You should have one, so raise your hand if you're missing something. They won't know otherwise. You should have one that called training a church plant core team. Okay, just raise your hand. The guys are coming around. And then you should have a card like this. Anybody missing this card? You're missing this card? You got a card? Okay. You're missing a card? Okay. You're welcome. All right. So now I don't have a card. Is there an extra one over there? Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So keep your hands up until you get all your handouts so that they know where you're at. Appreciate you guys doing that, helping me with that. All right, so we want to go through a couple of these things real quick. I'm going to ask Pastor Tim to come up and talk about the Seeds program that we have coming up next month. And he's going to share a little bit about what we'll be doing with that. If you could turn this mic on for us back there. Is it on?
We're good? Awesome. We have, in this handout here, it is a 2-day church planting training event coming up next month. We're going to be hosting it at the Beltsville Church. This is the Potomac Conference Seeds, which is, the Seeds is connected with the North American Division Church Planting Initiative. We are doing training Sabbath afternoon. If you'll notice the schedule inside, this is the preliminary schedule. The training starting Sabbath afternoon, so you can be in your church, preachers in your church. We're not pulling people out of their churches on Sabbath. You can stay in your church for worship. Then bring your team to come. We'll have refreshments there. If you don't have time for lunch, we'll have refreshments for Sabbath afternoon. And then we're meeting Sunday morning. We're providing lunch for you. We are giving away so many great resources to help you plant churches. This is just a way of empowering you to take the next step in planting churches. Whether you are just beginning to think about the process, bring as many of your leaders as you can, or if you're ready to launch, bring people. That we've organized it to where we have speakers that are speaking to people at various different levels. So if you're just beginning to think about it and you have leaders who are like, I don't even know if we want to do this, we've got stuff designed for them. If you're like ready to launch, we have stuff designed for them. You're going to want to bring as many people as you can. It is free. Potomac Conference is flipping the bill for it, so please come. But we do need you to register. Please register. You can take this snap image here of this. You can go to the Potomac Conference website. Under events, you'll see Seeds listed there. There's a registration form there. The registration form is for each individual, so copy the link to the registration link, send it to your leaders, send it to your church, and encourage as many of them as possible to come. We've done this several years now, and the last 2 years, it's been a great turnout. People have really, really enjoyed it and appreciate it, so I hope you can come.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And by the way, if you haven't used one of these, and most of you have, but all you have to do is usually put your camera on that. It'll take you right to the website right now. If you want to register right now, we want to make it easier for you. One of the things I like about the Seeds program is if you have members you think that they might be good core team members for you, or people you might send out, or people you just think would be interested in expanding their leadership capacities, this is a great place for them to get just a touch of what it looks like to be church planting, get some training, and then they're given a chance to make them decisions on where they want to go next. So I encourage you not only to go yourself, if you can at all possibly make it, but send people to this as well. Very good training. The next thing we're looking at is called AIM, and we're actually going to go on your own cards now. Everybody have this card, this little card. We would like you to fill this out. This is you need a card? No, you have a card. Okay, you don't have a card. All right, so would you run this back to him? Sure. Thank you. So on this card, you have a place to fill in your name and stuff. This is how we're going to take attendance at this meeting. So fill out your cards, please. And when you turn them in, you can turn them in with whatever you want to say on them, but you need to have your name and stuff on there so that we know you're here at this meeting. And so what I'd like you to do, I want to kind of jump around these questions a little bit if I can. So I want to look at actually the number 2 question. It says, I want to bring at least 5 members of my leadership team to Allies in Mission Church Revitalization Training. Now, there are some people that say, I can't plant a church. My church is too sick. Whatever else reasons. We want to answer that for you. So we're going to begin next year a very intensive training program that I started in New York. And we have, what it is we have usually up to 8 churches at a time we can do. So we can do this in different regions. But what it is you as a pastor or the volunteer lay pastor has to bring 5 of their key leaders, board members, elders, people like that. And we sit through, it's an all-day long Sunday process that happens about once every quarter. It's very intensive training on strategic planning, on how to be more evangelistic. The list goes on and on and on. If you would like some information about being part of that group, that you want to see your church get to the next level, we're going to teach you about small groups. We're going to teach you, there's so many different topics, I can't even list them all here today. But what we do is we give you several different things to work on, and we show you how as a group to implement a strategy and actually make the strategy happen in your church. We have all made plans, and then nothing's happened, right? So this is not only training how to do things, to betterment ministries and different things in your community, but also how do you make sure that this is going to happen and actually work. So this, if you want information, this isn't saying I'm signing up, but if you want information about that, check that one off, and I'll send you out the information about the Allies in Mission program. It lasts for almost 2 years. So it's 1 Sunday a quarter, and it goes for 8 Sundays. 8 different meetings. So it lasts for almost 2 years. We walk with you through this process. We have other teachers coming in. Boyan, who just was hired here from Texas, he's one of the teachers for this. He'll be helping with that, and others as well. So you're going to have some great training. Tim, I'm sure that we'll talk him into helping us out a little bit there as well. So check that off if you want to learn more about Allies in Mission. It's a revitalization program to make your churches stronger and healthier. And eventually, if you have a stronger, healthier church, they'll be more willing to plant as well. All right? Level 5 leaders is Acts. This is the bottom question here. I want to apply for the first cohort of Level 5 leader church planting training. This is I honestly believe it is the best training program for church planting that we have ever had in the North American church, and I think beyond. And for me, I actually think it's one of the best training programs I've seen from any denomination on any subject ever. We've been working on this primarily in Brazil and Florida, but mostly Brazil for the last 4 years. And so we've been perfecting this with some really intelligent, forward-thinking leaders who've been doing a fantastic job on creating this. It's a year-long cohort, and what we do is we come together as a team of leaders. We train, and we help help leaders know how to plant churches effectively. We have coaching for you by high-level church planters throughout the entire process. So if you are serious about church planting, we can't accept everybody on this one. I'm sorry. There's just no way. We could never do it. I've already had 5 applications from Chesapeake and people from other conferences wanting to come in. I said, I can't. I don't have room because it's a smaller group. It's intensive training with smaller teams. But the next year, as it grows, and we'll be able to add more teachers and expand it. So they're doing 2 of these in North America next year. One is in this conference, and one is in South New England Conference. So we have just 2 places in all of North America we're doing this next year. We would like, for those who are serious about this, to check that off. You want to apply for that, and I'll contact you about that, all right? VLP training. We're going to be training many more lay people to plant as well. There's no way, we don't have enough pastors to do the work that we have set in this conference, 1 for every 20,000. We just don't have enough pastors. And so we're going to be training some lay leaders to plant as well. If you have a lay person that you think should be trained as a volunteer lay pastor to plant a church, in the comment section, would you just write, I have somebody who can do that, a VLP, or give me their contact information, and I'll contact them directly. But we're letting you know that that's going to be coming up next year as well, and we're really excited about that. I don't know if you know what's happening in Florida. They have over 80 volunteer lay pastors. Those churches bring in over $5 million in tithe for that conference, and they're all lay-led, these 80 churches. Now, that doesn't get rid of your jobs. We need you even more now than we ever did because we need people to coach and train and help lead these volunteer lay pastors as well. All right? So check or write your little comment on the bottom there if you would, if you have somebody like that. All right, 10 steps to launching a healthy new church. That's the 3rd question down. It says, I'm interested in the one-day church planting training. 10 steps to starting a healthy new churches. We have done this for many years. This is the thing that I started out with. If you know Gerson Santos, I don't know if anybody knows him from the General Conference. When I was in Chesapeake planting a church, I began recruiting a core team. And somebody said, this guy Gerson, I never heard of him. He likes church planting. Go recruit him. So I didn't know what he did. Started recruiting him. He's like, why aren't you sharing this with other people? So we developed it to share. It's a strategy that I use to plant churches. There's lots of strategies, lots of successful ways to plant churches. But this helps you learn some principles so that you can plant a very strong church from the get-go. And that's right there, 10 steps to launch healthy churches. If you want to do that, everybody who wants to do that can do that. Anybody who wants to be part of that, if you have somebody in your church you think should be part of that, you can let them know as well. I'll bring this to several different areas. It's an all-day long, one-day class, intensive training on how to plant effective, healthy churches from the start. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but check that box if you're interested in this one. And if you don't want to do anything, if you don't want any training right now, that's okay. Just check that top box there. Say, I'm not interested in any of these training tracks right now. You can check that one. But please, fill these out. Put your name, your city that you live in, and your phone number. If you have any questions, you can put them on this card as well. And leave those in the middle of your table. We're going to gather them. Again, this is how we'll know you were here for this meeting, so put your names on them. Leave them on the middle of your table when you're done. Thank you so much for that, all right? All right. So I want to go on and start talking about why are we planting. We kind of talked about this some, but what are the benefits to planting a church? We plant because, well, it's God's design. This is what He said for us to do. He wants us to plant churches. We plant because this is our calling. As a church, we're called to plant more churches. We plant because this is actually the most effective method of evangelism. It's not the only, but there's been many denominations, including our own, that has research to find out what is the most effective form of evangelism. It is church planting. You'll grow the kingdom faster than anything else with church planting. We do it, but we want to use other forms of evangelism as well, so don't just think it's the only form. And we plant because it's also the most effective way to build a large number of leaders. Leaders are naturally grown when you plant churches, all right? So we're going to kind of give you a brief overview of the day-long training of the 10 steps to launching a healthy church. I'm going to give you a very quick, this is again a one-day program that we do. When I was doing it in New York, originally we did a 2-day, but we found it was hard for people to come 2 days, so we condensed it in 1 day. But I'm going to give it to you in like a half hour. So I've only done this at a couple places in a half hour. I did it at Pelk in a half hour. That's all they gave me there. I've done it in different places in a half hour. So I'm going to try and do it with you, but we'll have some questions at the end as well. So here we go. So first step, if you're going to plant a healthy new church plant, what do you want to do? I believe strongly the first step is understand the community you're working in. We have so many church plants that are just transporting what they have now. They're transplanting this culture into a new location. And even if it's a healthy church, doesn't necessarily mean it meets the needs of that new location. We need to actually find out, what do the people need in that area? Who are these people? How are we best going to reach them? So we spend some time, and if you come to the full training, we can spend some time showing you how to get into the community and really figure out, who are these people? How do you connect with the leaders of the community? How do you figure out what steps a new church plant should take to have that biggest impact in that brand new community? So that is always the number one step, is to focus on the harvest instead of focus on just Adventists. Now, if you want to transplant your church because it's super healthy and you need another place to meet because you're overflowing, praise God. I like that you're healthy and you're doing that, but I still think you need to focus on the harvest. You still need to focus on who is in that area and care about those people's needs more than just transplanting what you're already doing. Most Adventists, unfortunately, have no close friendships outside the church. You guys know this, right? And this isn't news to you. Most Adventists, they don't even try to make new friends outside the church. And our church's ministries are so focused on the already saved. We need to start planting churches that focus on the lost, that focus on their needs. We call this the next person culture. What that means is we want to plant churches where their focus is on the next person walking in the door who doesn't know Jesus. That's what we designed the church for, not for those who are already going to heaven. This is, again, if we build church for Christians, we've got it backwards because they are church. That doesn't make sense. They are church. They're supposed to be ministering as Jesus did. He said, I came to what? Seek and save the lost. So when somebody is saved already, they're supposed to be emulating that. Our churches that we plant are supposed to be doing that. We're here for the next people coming in the door who don't know Jesus. That doesn't mean a watered down gospel. In fact, it means the opposite. It means they have to have a very strong biblical message. But it's got to be done in a way that people can understand. It's got to be done in a different way than we normally do. We don't say, when people walk into our church plants, we don't shake their hands and say, Happy Sabbath. I love saying Happy Sabbath. I love it. But if they don't know about the Sabbath, then we've automatically said there's an insiders group and an outsiders group. And you're the outsider. My dad was a non-practicing Catholic, but we went once in a while when I was a kid. The one thing I remember about that service is everybody got up at the same time. Everybody kneeled down at the same time. Everybody recited a prayer and sang songs at the same time. And I was like, how do they know what's going on? I couldn't figure it out. I felt so outside. But I go into our churches and it's not that much different. We all know what invocation means. It's time for the invocation. What? We all sing this song after we pray, and people are like, How do they know? We have to be more inclusive of people who don't know Jesus. You can do all those things, but explain them. Tell them what's happening so that they can feel like they're part of the worship with us as well. All right? Christ's method alone, Ellen White says, will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior did what? Mingle with the people as one who desired their good. These are the type of churches we want to plant. Churches that mingle in the community, finding out what they need so that we can do that. He showed sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, and won their confidence. Then he invited them, follow me. What if we planted 311 churches that followed that? Would that be revolutionary? Absolutely it would be. It absolutely would be. So we need to understand our new community. Number 2, list your core values. We need to actually know what kind of church we're going to be. Core values basically are the things that make you unique. It makes you different than any other church. So you have to know what they are before you actually start the church. I have a lot of churches that don't create an identity, don't know who they are, and then other people with differing visions and ideas start coming in, and it starts being stretched this tangent and that direction, and they have no idea where they're going, and their original focus is totally lost. Core values guide your behavior, both within the church as well as how you interact with those in the world. I like to use this. This isn't my idea. This comes from a book. But values basically help us keep our goals and our action methods to achieve those goals in line with where we want to go. If we don't have values, they can go anywhere they want. But values act as kind of a riverbank. They keep everything heading towards the goal that you have as a church. So the second step is always to pick out or decide what are those values and how do you know what those values are? Well, you've already begun to work in the community, you've studied the Bible, and whatever God has put on your heart. And we'll explain that in more detail if you come to the training as well. Number 3, know your goals for members. This is, I don't care if you're interested in church planting or not. This is the one to listen to. You can listen to anything you else want, but listen to this if you're a pastor, all right? Let me ask you a question. How many disciples, strong disciples, do you have in your church today? Give me a number. Exactly. Everywhere around the world, I hear the same thing. Silence. Jesus said, go make disciples. How many members do you have? Well, we can tell you that. What was your tithe last year? Oh, we know that. Jesus didn't say go make members. He didn't say go make higher tithe dollars. He didn't say track your Sabbath school. Nothing wrong with doing those things. But Jesus said go make disciples. The one thing he tells us to make is the one thing we don't count. Let's say you're a soccer fan. You walk into your friend's house. You miss the game. He's sitting there and you say, hey, how did our team do today? How did we do? And he's like, oh, man, you're not going to believe it. The uniforms, they're a different shade of green now. And you're like, what? No, it was amazing. No. How did our team do? Oh, man, you wouldn't, it was crazy. The head coach, he's got a new haircut. You're all frustrated, right? Because what are you looking for? You want to know the score. Are we winning? Do we lose? What's the score? Jesus says, go make disciples. And we say, Jesus, we're up 10% in tithe. No, I asked you, did you make me some disciples? So we have to start thinking about what did Jesus actually ask us to do? What was his one thing he asked for? Make disciples. How many disciples do you have? Well, a lot of churches don't know because they don't even know what a disciple really looks like. That's normal. There's a handout that you have that actually is one of the things that I use, but you can use whatever you want. You can find in the Bible what a disciple looks like by just studying what Jesus made. What did they look like? What was the end product when he created a disciple? What were some of the things? Now, this isn't a 20-point, do this and you have an instant disciple thing. That doesn't work. We've probably all tried those things. It's not real. But we do need to know what a disciple looks like so we can help guide people to becoming more and more like that. And does your church have a clear path for members to become disciples? If somebody is baptized, there should be the next steps waiting for them, ready to get them to the next level so that eventually they can be a strong leader for Christ in however he has gifted them. So again, I've showed you I'm not going to go through these in detail, but the 3 things that we found, again, don't copy us. Find what you find in yourself in the Bible. We found that all disciples are mission-minded. That means they go wherever they're going. They want to spread the good news. They have that passion. They have a servant's heart. That next person culture, we talked about this, where they really focus in on people who don't know Jesus and they love them. Social justice is part of that. They want to grow. They're looking to grow in different areas of their life spiritually, want to do things with excellence. They want to make disciples. And then they embrace community. Jesus prayed that we'd be unified, that we'd truly be really one. We have a thing in our church plants where if you join, you have to join a small group because just coming to church is not enough. You're never going to become community just by sitting and listening to me talk. And then team ministry, we do ministries in teams so that we actually build more community. You can do it however you want. That's what we did to help grow people into disciples. Number 4, you have all of this information. These were the foundational 3 steps. Know your community, develop your values, and have a pathway to discipleship. Now you take all of this and you create a proposal. I shouldn't even be talking about this step. This should be Tim Matting. I've never seen anybody create proposals for church planting like Tim Matting. So if you want to see a proposal example, ask him he'll send you, man, they're so good. Very well organized. What we need is a pathway, kind of a blueprint. What is it going to look like? Write it out so that people can see how this is going to be developed. You can also help use this in future church plants so that they have maybe a way to look and see what they can do if they're, maybe a lay leader wants to plant a church in the future. It's very useful. I love it that I can hand it to the conference. I give a proposal to the conference and they can see what we're doing, and if they have any concerns, they can tell me right up front so it doesn't derail the project. They can tell us right up front. If you have big potential donors, give them that as well. That's not the sexy step. This is the unfun step, but it's a very useful step. Then you take all that proposal and smash it down into one page, a summary sheet called an information sheet, and you use that as a recruitment tool, and that is to do interviews to build a unified team. So what this is we want to actually have a team that is going the same direction. We want to build a team that has a passion to do the things that Christ asks us to do. So why do you think that we don't just invite everybody to be part of a core team of a new church plant? Give me some reasons why you don't just want to do an open invitation. You got to say it louder. Yeah, there's some crazy people out there. That's right. There are crazy people. They're going to want to, do their own thing. Yeah, people have their own agenda. Absolutely. Yes. Exactly. Yeah, you can hear church planters speaking out there. You want to be intentional about creating a DNA. The way that God is calling you to build this church in this community is very specific, and you want to build a DNA around that. It's very, very good reasons. So we don't just say, hey, anybody who wants to join, Because there's a lot of things that are dangerous about doing that. Often you get people, I don't know if you ever met anybody like this, but you've got people who want to control churches. Anybody met any of those control freaks? Yeah, I mean, they're everywhere, right? Man, they love church plants. You know, they've been battling these established churches, trying to get their foot in the door, trying to take over this church. And when a church plant starts, they start rushing in. If you just let anybody in, they come in and then they want to take over. I just got a call from a church plant saying, why didn't I listen? Why didn't I listen? Now we've got all these people. We just did this open invitation and now it's nightmarish. You know, and I'm like, I don't know what to do to help you now. You know, it's a little late. There's also people who have issues with the Adventist church. They have doctrinal things. They think maybe if I come into a church plant, they'll let me slide and I can teach these things to other people. You mentioned already that people have different agendas. And then there's some great people too, really solid Adventists that don't fit because they have a different value system. It's okay. Not everybody's going to fit into every church plant. You want to find people who have the same values. We want people, and this is basically the same thing as a disciple. I want to find people I know that are this or can be coached this very easily. Mission-minded, they want to grow, they want community, and then of course they love the people that we're going to be serving. So our core team needs to share the same vision. When I planted in Seattle, that was the only church I actually stayed a long time at. I was at that church for 9 years. We had 0 church fights in 9 years. None. Nothing happened because we were on the same vision. We found people who were excited about what we're doing in that community. We interviewed them. Those who wanted to do that, that's who we chose. Those who were looking to do other things, they weren't part of that core team, that initial leadership push. The ones that create the DNA of a church. Now, we loved the other people, but they just weren't allowed to be part of the DNA. And it makes all the difference. In fact, we had people coming in. I loved it. It was so cool. We had people coming in trying to turn us a different direction. You know, hey, you know what we do in this church? Da-da-da-da, you guys should do this too. I would never say a word. My members would flock. Not in a mean way, in a loving way. But they'd flock around and say, this is what we do in this church. This is where we're going. They would explain it. And when your members have the vision so well, they know where they're going, they know what this church values, when they know it ingrained in who they are, there's nobody who's going to turn that ship away. There's no one's going to do it. It's very, very powerful. I'm really excited about that type of stuff. All right? So what is the interview process? Basically what I do when I plant churches, even if I don't know anybody, I just start finding somebody. Like when I moved to Seattle, the only thing I knew about Seattle is that they had the Supersonics. That was when they were still there, and I was really mad when they left. And they had Microsoft, and that's all I knew. I didn't know anything about it. And so I didn't know anybody, but the conference had somebody who was helping me, and he knew a few people. He was brand new at a seminary. He knew 7 people, so we interviewed those people. Shared with them from that information sheet that we created. What are the goals? Where are we going? What are the values? You know, what's it going to look like in this community? All these things. And those 7 people then gave us names to other people. And we were able to interview more people and interview more people. So that's basically the process of what it looks like. It's about an hour, hour and a half conversation. If you come to the full training on this, we'll go through the entire thing with you. I can't give that to you all today. But I will tell you the very first person I ever interviewed was named Jesse. Very first person. He was 21 years old. He had been raised an Adventist at a large Adventist church, had never been asked to do anything. We were sharing what we were doing. He was sharing about himself. A very artistic young man, had won Seattle Film Festival already. Really good guy. And I just asked him near the end, I said, Jesse, God has gifted you in so many ways. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but would you be willing to use those gifts to help build God's kingdom and help us build this church? And he was real dead-faced, pan-faced. I don't know what he was thinking. And then he said, "You have my life." I said, "What?" I was shocked. I was like, "What?" And he says, "You have my life." And he was serious. He was serious. We found out later he was actually planning to leave Christianity. He had never gotten anything out of church. They never plugged him in. He was going to become a druid because some of his friends from high school had become druids. It had been cool. This kid quit his job and got a different job so he could have more time to help us. He was volunteering 40 hours a week helping us get this church started. I trained him how to do interviews so that we could get more interviews going on. He was one of the 7 that I picked. He was one of those guys that had never gone to college that the conference chose to hire. I mean, it's amazing when we do God's path. All these things start folding in front of us, just unfolding right in front of us. Beautiful stories like this, time and time again. So at the end of every interview, this is what we do. We never pressure anybody to join us, even with Jesse. When he said, "You have my life," I said, "Pray about this." Even though I want you on my core team. I tell people, I'd love for you to be on my core team, but the Bible says that God builds his church. And Christians are the church, so he decides who should be here. So I ask everybody, pray for a week. If God is not leading you somewhere else, then we'd love for you to be part of this. But pray about this first. The next thing we say is pray about this because Satan has heard what's going on and he is not happy. He does not like this. So pray for protection of this church plant. And then the third thing we say is, I basically say, I don't know enough people to grow this church. But now you know the kind of church we're building. And certainly you know people who would be excited about this vision, this mission in this community. So certainly you know the people and that I don't know that could make an impact in this church. So if you would, pull out your phone and let's go through it. Let's see who you know that you think would be excited about this possibility. And we get the names right there. So the first guy knew 7 people. This is the first time I tried this in Seattle when I knew no one. First guy that they brought me knew 7. Interviewed them. They knew people. They gave us their names. We interviewed them. Never pressured people at all. Very, very low key. We interviewed the people that they knew. In fact, we went 11 generations deep. We tracked it. We interviewed in about 4.5 months over 200 people. I didn't know anybody. 4.5 months later, I interviewed over 200 people. Out of that, we picked a core team of 77. We had a grand opening about 5.5 months later of 212 people. This process works. It's designed to grow effective, healthy, targeted churches. The way that I believe Jesus is calling us to make them. It doesn't mean you have to do church planting the way I do, but this is a way that might help you, and you can take at least some of those principles. So once you start getting a team, you start training the team, start investing in them. Let them know how much they mean to you, how important they are to the work that you're doing. So some of the things that I do is I train them in these 5 areas. Growing together spiritually. I use Henry Blackaby's book, his workbook actually, Experiencing God, but you can use whatever you want. I just like that because I can see if they're doing the homework, and it does help build spiritual community. We train on leadership, not just leadership of a church, but how to lead in the real world. I am so blessed. I was raised in a church that cared about this. And I wasn't raised in the church. I came to the church as a teenager later, and my mom was kind of all over the place. And I watched her be ordained as a witch. We went to Pentecostal churches. We went to Scientology. We did everything. And then when this weird church that went to church on Saturday sent a thing, she said, "Oh, I want to try that one. They go to church on Saturday. How weird." Anything that was unusual, she wanted to be part of. And I listened to a preacher, Dale Bruzette. I don't know if anybody knows who that guy is. Del Bruzette delivered a powerful message from the Bible, and I was hooked. None of my other family are Adventists. I was the only one, so I'd ride my bicycle 10 miles from my house to that church. And I lived in Colorado. Didn't matter if it's snowing or what, I'd ride my bicycle. That church immediately made me a deacon, so they'd give me the keys to the church. I'd ride my bicycle before anybody else got there, whether it was snowing or not, they expected me there. Turn on the lights, turn on the heat. They made me part of the Pathfinder leadership. They put me in, helped me learn how to teach during the youth Sabbath schools. They put me on nominating committee. That was not a thrill, but all these things, they invested in their youth. They invested in their members to become leaders. When I went off to work later, I worked at a pizza place. My wife decided to go to school at Walla Walla. She was my fiance at the time. I was too poor to go to school. So I just got a part-time job at a Pizza Hut. I was working there. The first day they said, if it's slow, clean the kitchen. We got a meeting. They came out. They're like, what happened to the kitchen? It's clean. So I guess they were freaking out because I actually cleaned like they told me to. I don't know why that was so weird for them. Work ethic must have not been strong in that place. But they thought that must mean that I am a leader because I know how to clean a kitchen. So they made me a shift manager. Anybody ever been a shift manager here besides me? It's like the lowest of low-level management, the very beginning. They took me to a training course with all the other Pizza Hut shift managers in the region. There's about 50 of us. And so I'm a 21-year-old kid at this time going through this training, and quickly some of us kind of rose above the crowd. We knew more about how to do things than others. So they made 5 of us become team leaders in this training course. And the team leaders all had to give a talk. And it was powerful. Oh, the subject was amazing. It was, why is it important to make pizza? Oof. Man, I am not joking you. I'm serious about this. I actually had some people crying when I was speaking, because my church had taught me to speak with passion. And so I started saying, you're not just making pizza to get food into somebody's stomach. You've got these people who all week their families are separated, they're working, they're going to school, they have no connection with each other. And they come to your place. They come to your restaurant. And people were crying. And afterwards, I was still engaged. I wasn't married yet. My wife can testify about this. The boss came, the owner of it was a franchise. I can't remember how many restaurants we owned. And he came to my wife and said, who is this guy? How can a 21-year-old know how to lead like this? And she said, his church taught him. Yes. This guy is an atheist. And he was blown away. We have to train people how to make an impact in the world as well. We have to train people to be leaders. So when I develop a core team, I'm training them not just how to lead a church, but how to be leaders in life, in their family, in their workplace, and in the church. We need to teach people how to make an impact in the community. We train our team how to run vital ministries. I wanted to know all of the ministries. That Pizza Hut, they quickly raised me to the highest position I could be in without being the owner. I was 23 years old, and I had 1,000 employees underneath me in that Pizza Hut. Why? Because I followed the exact same step as number 4 there. I trained every one of my waiters how to run the cash register, how to wash dishes, how to make pizza. I made the dishwasher learn how to wait tables. I trained everybody how to do everything that I knew how to do. I trained people who ran the phones how to write schedules. I created leaders in that place. And rapidly, they kept pulling my people that I was training out to run different stores And in our region, almost half the managers were people I had trained rapidly. It just exploded. And so they kept giving me promotions and promotions and promotions. All I was doing is following simple biblical steps. That's what Jesus did. Replace yourself. Train people to do what you do. In fact, you want them to do the same thing Jesus said, be even greater than you. That's what leaders want. So this is what we do when we're building a core team. We train them on these things. Explain to them how we're planting this church. While I'm planting, I'm explaining it so they know what's going on. We want them to be able to plant churches in the future. Very important. Build your ministries. Before you ever start your church service, start your ministries. Make sure that you know how to do them well with excellence. Give your team time to practice these things. Every single one of your ministries should be running well and smooth before your church ever opens. Imagine if I had to run restaurants. You know what my eventual role became in Pizza Hut, by the way? I became the restaurant planter. Seriously. Is God crazy? No, he's awesome. It's amazing, isn't it, what God does to prepare us? My job was to do demographic research, look at a region, find out where the best places would be to plant new restaurants and open those, train the team so that they were highly effective from day one, and launch those. God is really good. He knows what he's doing. He's prepared all of you in ways you don't even know yet. When you start planting, you'll say, wait a minute. I can see a connection to my past. He has prepared you to do this work. When you start training disciples, when you start building people who you're sending out, when you start releasing leaders, all these things that he's done in your past will come back. He will use it to enhance your ministry. And it's beautiful to watch. It's amazing. So we make sure that all that thing is working. Things like worship, greeting, children's ministry, small groups, community outreach, whatever those things are, we train anything that's a key ministry in your church, we're training. Then once your team gets big enough, and I usually set a number, I say I want to have 35 core team members or 50 or whatever you want. Once you hit that number, then you open your calendar and you say, 5 months in the future, we're going to have our grand opening. And then you begin to do these kind of services. For 5 months, you do an information meeting. If you come to the training, I'll tell you what that is. I'm not going to tell you now. Do socials twice a month. And you actually have practice services. You actually practice doing church before you ever launch for the public so that you can do it right. You do that whole cycle for 5 months, repeating every month the same thing until you have your grand opening. If you do this one step, that'll triple the size of your church. And then finally, you get to have a service for the public, your great grand opening. Not just a grand opening, but a great grand opening. And what we want to do is you make sure you market to everybody. We'll explain how to do that if you come to our extended training. But most church plants have a big grand opening, but they don't plan on how to keep these looky-loos. You know, that's kind of a real estate term. But looky-loos, people who are just there to kind of view the new church. Wow, a new church is starting. Let's take a look. We actually create a plan on how to capture those people and draw them into the family right away from the first week that they come. So we do a sermon about how this church is called to read. In fact, I'm just going to skip this. You're going to have to come to the training if you want this stuff and learn how we set up our room. Everything is done strategically so that people who come will be funneled into the family of your church from the very first week. And then finally, do it again. I never, ever train people how to plant churches. If you think I am here ever to train you to church plant, you're wrong. I'm here to help you become a multiplier. I want you to plant a movement of churches, not just one. We have to start thinking in a grander scale. One church is great. Praise God for every new church planted. But how much more powerful is it if in the DNA of every one of those new churches, that a multiplication DNA, where they were going to plant more churches and the churches they plant will plant more churches. This is how we will achieve the goals that God has given this conference, that God has called us to do as His people. So, one of the things I do is the offering, the very first offering. We gather an offering that grand opening week. We say, we're not even keeping this offering for us this week. This church is here to serve this community, but there's other communities that need to hear this message, need us to serve them as well. So we're going to take an offering today for our next church plant, even on our grand opening of our first one. All right? So again, members bring in members, leaders train leaders, disciples make new disciples, and churches are called to plant new churches. The first and most important step to organic multiplication and church revitalization is this: obeying God. That's all we are asking. Let's all obey God's call. Whatever He's calling us to do, let's do that. All right, any questions? It can be on anything that we talked about today. Yeah, I hammered you with so much information all at once, huh? Yeah.
This goes along with what we're talking about. You know, our vision is to have healthy disciple-making churches. And another vision is to double our membership. Another vision statement that we have is all of our schools are healthy. And another one is every community of 20,000 or more that does not have an Adventist presence, we have an Adventist presence. And as we've done studies and demographics and things like that, we have found, let me give you two examples. Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. How many people live in Fairfax County? Around 1.4 million people. Over 850,000 of those in Fairfax County were born English-speaking U.S. citizens here in Fairfax County. So how many English churches, Seventh-day Adventist churches, are in Fairfax County? There are two. Potomac has one, Vienna. And there's Emmanuel, which is in Allegheny East. Out of 850,000 English-speaking people, we have two churches. And we have a lot of other groups that live in Fairfax County. Now, we have very good work among the Hispanic churches.
Amen.
We have for every 12,000, we have an Adventist church in Fairfax County, a Spanish-speaking. So, praise God, but our focus is not on planting more Spanish churches in Fairfax County, although we can do that. The challenge is, how do we plant churches to reach people that we're not reaching now? And we have to start thinking. Let me give you another example. Washington, D.C. Now, there's one Potomac English-speaking church in Washington, D.C. What is it, CJ? Capitol Memorial. And there are a few Allegheny East churches in Washington, D.C., but the demographics of Washington, D.C. is changing quickly. And the Allegheny East churches are becoming commuter churches because people are moving out. And you drive through different areas in Washington, D.C., and it's changing. How are we reaching Washington, D.C.? And there are places all over Prince William County and Richmond, in Maryland. There's lots of opportunity. We need to be about church planting. That's why, we're talking about this. And the value of strategically planting churches, because it grows the kingdom.
Amen.
And so, this is an introduction, but this is what we need to be about, is growing. Now, I was, a pastor, and my mentality is, I want to have a big church. I want to grow, and, once I get to 1,000, then we'll plant a church. But we can continue to grow, but strategically plant churches too. Every church should be thinking about this. And we have, the task is big, but God is big. Because we need to reach our community for Jesus.
Amen.
So that's just, sorry I took so much of
No,
it,
I
but I
appreciate
just
it.
wanted to
Thank you.
share that this is why we're focusing. It's not that, we need to be doing evangelism, but one of the best ways of evangelizing is through church planting.
Amen.
So it just kind of shares a little bit of why, and we're just beginning to think about how.
Amen. Thank you so much. Yeah, please. You got the mic.
Well, one of the issues concerning this is that I think, let me go old school regional conference for a second. Regional conference would say, we need a church in Upper Marlboro. I'm just using that mindset. And they would say, we're going to ask Seabrook, Restoration, and I won't say CBC is too far up, but let's say another church in the area, and we're going to ask you to combine to put a church in the area, to put Upper Marlboro. When the conference says, hey, Graham, we want you to put a church in Upper Marlboro, I mean, that's great. But what happens is that we've been babysitting for so long that if Paul Graham decides, I'm putting it straight out there, if Paul Graham decides that he's going to put a church in Upper Marlboro and I shift my efforts there, the DMV area is not like Brooklyn. It is not like LA. People shift to different churches because you sneezed wrong. I mean, if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, but I know I'm right. I've been here for 10 years, and if somebody doesn't like something that you say, they're going to shift to another church.
Right.
And if another preacher comes in, everybody's going to shift to another church. And I feel like, and I said it in our group meetings or our lead meetings, that if we're able to use our resources for an area and then move to another area and keep using our resources to different areas, a lot of us haven't been trained to raise up churches. A lot of us have been trained to babysit churches. A lot of us have been trained to just resource the churches instead of saying, okay, we're going to go to that area and do that. The way that I understand it, a lot of times lay people would leave and do a church and then call for a pastor for that church that they do.
Right.
Instead of the pastor saying, okay, I'm going to go to that church and do that. So I know that this area, in the DMV area, one of the difficult things is that the people are so pastor dependent that if you walk away, I'm just using the word walk away, and go to another church and use your efforts there, then folks are going to be like, he doesn't care. He's on his own agenda. He's doing what he wants to do. The conference doesn't care. I mean, that's how they think.
Yep.
So the mindset is really changing the mindset of the people that growing a healthy church and building another church is something that we all are supposed to be doing
Right.
together. You see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
And I simply say that because when we're deciding to put a church in Upper Marlboro, I get the kickback that, well, who's going to take care of us in the meantime? Or another one is, we're not healthy over here enough to go somewhere else.
Right.
And the truth of the matter is that how do we now tell the members of the churches that we're at now, that we're going to do this, and it's not because we don't love you, it's because there's a need. That's the real question.
Yeah.
How do we tell our members?
It's a great
Okay?
question. Yeah.
Can I just use one as an example?
Sure.
I'm going to use, okay. I'm going to use, I use Pastor Tapp because he's our largest church, so to speak. If he says, man, you know, I'm going to go to Hyattsville and put a church in Hyattsville, I guarantee the members there will be like, well, he doesn't care anymore? You understand where I'm coming from?
Absolutely.
And so how do we now train the people that we leave to understand the mindset of church growth in that aspect?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually got multiple layers because it's not just different in the DMV, it's different in every church in the DMV as well. There is so many variety of cultures in our churches and different ways of looking at this thing. So every pastor is going to have to navigate a different scenario. But there's going to be some similarities to what you've talked about. So one of the things that we talk about is make sure you're introducing culture. How do you introduce culture? That's part of our training. How do you introduce new culture into a church? But in your case, if it's impossible for you to actually be part of the core team rather than an overseer only, then we train how do you train a core team in your church to plant that church? Because we're going to need lay people to do this. Because you're right. So people are so conditioned. Let me be honest with you, everyone here. You know how hard it is to change somebody's culture, right? It's very difficult to change the culture of the church. Every single pastor, we're all called to be revitalization specialists if we're going into an existing church and it's plateaued or dying. But how hard is that? It's really hard. Very difficult thing. So what we have to do is we have to look at what resources do we have available to make this happen. If it's not me, if I'm not the resource, if it's impossible for me right now to be the resource, I can still be working on the culture for that in the future, but I need to find other resources inside the church that I can send out, train up to be the leaders that will plant up in Marlboro or wherever we're planting the next church plant. Plus, you have people like myself that can come in and help you. Tim Madding is an expert in this. I know most of you don't know who Boyan is yet, but he is a high-level trainer of church planting. He knows what he's doing. There's other people here who have a lot of experience in church planting. If we begin to work as a team, and they don't hear from one church, oh, we're going to be moving forward with this, and the next church, oh, it's okay to sit back and do nothing. But if every church buys in and starts making this movement forward, then we're going to see they don't have a place to jump and hide. Because people want to just do nothing. A lot of people, not everybody, but there's a lot of people who just want to do nothing. They want to be babysat. They want to be taken care of. So that's why it's important for all of us to be on the mission of this conference and to make this go forward. I know it's tough. I know it's very difficult. But as we work together to do this, a little bit of time, you're not going to change things overnight. But part of the training that we do is helping churches get more strategic towards mission, more strategic on how to take the next steps as a church. That's why I tried to come in with the idea everybody's going to plant. That's why I added AIM, because there's some churches that we know we cannot plant right now, whatever the reason they say. All right, well, let's help you get on mission through this process. So, yeah, another question? Yes. Can you say it loud like a pastor's voice? Uh-huh.
To ask a question that is relevant to church planting. You said you were trained up the line to the point where you were so good at it, they used you to plant restaurants around. And I don't know how they did it, if they just saw a little house and they rented it and put a kitchen in their restaurant, and how they did it to make those restaurants viable, attractive, so that they have the ambience that you want for people to want to come into. Now, using that as the analogy, how do we plant churches and support them financially in a way that makes them attractive, that the clientele that we are trying to reach would want to come into them. Where is that funding source coming from? Is it from the local church, or is the conference going to raise up these churches, literally, physically, the plan, the facility, and so forth, to make these new churches possible?
That's a great question.
And I just add
okay.
one last thing to that.
Sure.
I'm from Jamaica, and I've lived in the United States long enough, 40 years, to realize that there are some churches that are struggling with their little, what I'll call lean-to church, barely have decent bathrooms for people to come into without holding their noses, facilities that do not represent the excellence that we heard about this morning. And so if we are thinking of proliferating those kind of facilities, we'll be doing an disservice to the cause of Christ. What is the strategic plan for financially supporting the infrastructure of new churches?
It's a great question. So I will just tell you that there is no one way to do this. Again, we're never going to say you have to do it exactly like this. But in 22 years of church planting, I have never, ever been in a building where we owned or even rented 24/7. I've only been in buildings where I rent on Sabbath, and that's the only time I have it. Everything else we do is in homes, and it thrives. I actually say to churches, I don't want a building. I never want to have the hassle of a building over me. I don't want to deal with the issues of fixing the plumbing and changing the carpet. I don't want those things. I want to be able to grow. I don't want a building to tell me how big my church can get. I want to be able to grow and move to the next size place as we expand. I'm not saying you have to do it like that, but if the church is a building, that's all we're going to focus on. The church isn't a building, though. It is people. It's a movement of people, and it expands, it grows, it's fluid, and I want it to be exactly like that. And I know that we have buildings that are in bad shape, and I know I don't deal with that stuff. I've never had one. I am the last person you should ask on how to make your building better, because I've never, ever had a church building in my life. I've only rented places, and I actually prefer to rent places that are not churches. I like to be in schools, in cafeterias, in wherever I can be in the community, right in the heart of the community. I don't want a building to hold me back. And if we think of building only, it will never work, because there's not enough money in our coffers to build 311 new buildings that are going to be effective. It's just never going to work that way. Yeah. But thank you so much. I'm sorry, Shane, you can talk to me one-on-one. I really need to.
Yeah, Steve is going to be around.
Okay.
Years ago, when I first taught my first church planting meeting, there were two pastors that were probably in their 60s. And when I finished, they came up and said, "We feel awful. We don't feel like there's a place for us to live." If you're sitting there feeling that way, feeling like somebody doesn't see me and somebody you don't understand, and it's not you or me to express because boy, you know, maybe I haven't been doing the right thing with my ministry. Why don't you get together and listen to me here? My opinion is we don't get off the planet until church planting becomes normal again. Because what we're doing isn't working. It won't keep us with just birth in the county, physical birth, much less people being born again. So what you're here to say, please. It is a matter of obedience, yes. It is also, though, a matter of great privilege. Don't let this slip away. Your church, even if you personally don't go plant, your church can support a plant somewhere, somehow, and there are some of you sitting here right now that is calling that church. Don't say no. Don't say no. Don't ever say no to the right thing just because it seems impossible. True. That's not what God is doing. He can give you what you need to plant the church that He's calling you to do, and then possibly do it again and again and again. I want to go home. I want to see people say, "This is how it will happen."
Okay, all right. Thank you, Steve. But